Hey everybody, Greg Pruitt here with Idaho Dispatch, and I am joined today by Representative Dorothy Moon. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you. First day of session. I'm glad to be talking with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so, obviously, this interview, we're not going to be talking about the legislative session as much, and maybe that'll come up with what we're doing. But I guess first, before we get into why we're doing the interview today, can you tell people a little bit about yourself
Okay.
and who you are?
Okay. Well, I'm Representative Dorothy Moon, and I represent District 8, and that currently includes Lemhi, Custer, Boise County, Gem, and Valley County. It's 16,000 square miles, a very rural area, and great people. So I'm talking about loggers, miners, ranchers, people who pretty much do multiple use in these heavily forested counties of mine. I've loved representing rural Idaho, and this is my third term, my 6th year coming up. But I think I could serve them just as well in my next endeavor.
Okay, which is you're now running for Secretary of State for the state of Idaho, and I guess kind of a position that maybe up until this last year, a lot of people didn't really pay much attention to what that position was and what it did and their responsibilities. But it's kind of become a big, election integrity has been a big talking point throughout the last year. So, what made you want to go into that particular position? So a lot of times, like Representative Scott Bedke as well as Representative Priscilla Gate, they're going for lieutenant governor, right? So a lot of people think when they're going for a higher office, they're going for governor, lieutenant governor. But you went for Secretary of State. What kind of ultimately drove you to run for that instead?
Well, what ultimately drove me into running for that position is that after Trump lost the election, with these battleground states coming in with different results from what was expected, when the polling places were shut down and counts were shut down at 11 o'clock at night, and said they'd be getting back together at 8 o'clock, I think everybody knew in their heart something was very wrong. And later in December, if you remember, Texas filed a lawsuit because they were now disenfranchised because of all these battleground states in determining who won the presidential election. And nobody had come forward on joining the Texas lawsuit after hundreds of emails and letters. In fact, I've never received more contact from constituents on any issue than I had on the election integrity issue. So Lieutenant Governor McGeehan decided, since the governor or the attorney general would not join the lawsuit with Texas, that she filed an amicus brief. And 40 legislators signed on, of which I am one. And then it seemed that in the press that the governor was going to do his own amicus brief, which I thought was interesting considering our lieutenant governor asked everyone to sign on. But I don't think there was really any intent to do that. And I think it was just kind of upsetting because the population of this state, 65% came out for Trump. And whether or not any one of our constitutional officers supported Trump or not, the people did. And we should have jumped on the lawsuit because we had the highest percentage of Trump supporters. And so it was kind of upsetting to me that we weren't. Missouri, my home state, was number 18, I believe, the last one to sign on to the Texas lawsuit. And so I started going around and talking to folks, not only in my district, but also around the state. I've been from Caldwell over to St. Anthony, Buell, Moore, Twin Falls, Burley, Rupert, Gooding, everywhere that I could go and talk every weekend after December when that lawsuit was filed. And if you remember, let me just back up a second. It was filed on a Thursday at noon, had to be in Thursday by noon. By Friday, it was thrown out by the Supreme Court. And at that time, the governor was talking about doing an amicus brief. And so it was right after that, and people were still upset, that I started talking to him and more or less confirming, yes, you're right, we should have jumped onto the lawsuit. And there are issues, there are election integrity issues in the state, despite what people are saying or the press was trying to make it look like there were none. There were no issues here in the state. So after going around, it was every weekend during session through April. I did 40 talks, well over 4,000 people in all of those locations I just mentioned and more, council, and I went up north a little bit too. And after hearing what the folks had to talk about with their own elections and voting issues, I knew that if we do not have fair elections in this state, we're done. Well, the entire country's done. We'll lose our republic. To me, this is the biggest issue we're dealing with as Idaho and as the country, because we will lose our republic.
So what are, as you were traveling across the state and you're talking to citizens about, some of these issues, what are they bringing up in Idaho? Are they saying that Idaho has a bunch of fraud, or is it, we got to do better at checking IDs, or, I mean, what are the issues that they keep bringing up to you?
The ID was a big issue. So the ID on government issued ID, the fact that a student from college can show an ID and then also show their phone with a Verizon bill, that doesn't put you at any residence. It really doesn't. So they talk about having a utility bill, but I've heard in a couple of the counties in which I was talking to folks that was a problem, that they saw a bunch of college kids coming in with their student ID and no discernible type of utility bill. Another thing was masking. So people would go in, and if you ask to see a government ID, and that before you give them a ballot, they need to drop their mask so you can verify that. People were walking in with masks on and not being asked to uncover their face. That's a problem. The other issues, mainly with absentee ballots, having the drop boxes. When you talk about ballot harvesting, if someone was to collect a bunch of ballots, things that have happened like at senior citizen centers or where there's collectively older people that maybe can't get to the polls, people will go and say they'll help get those in for them, and they could come up with a dozen ballots and just start putting them in boxes. Now, if you took it to the clerk's office, they'd probably go, now, where are these coming from? There would be some questioning, or there should be some questioning as to where they all came from. But the boxes, that allows for maybe some shenanigans, and I think there's some investigation going on right now in one of the battleground states about that very issue. They have some video of multiple drop boxes having hundreds of ballots put in by just a few people in the wee hours of the morning. So those are some of the things that have been mentioned. I mean, not the battleground state, but here a bit example, but the ones in the state are primarily the identification is a huge issue. And then the other thing, of course, are the request for absentee ballots. If you remember, when I first got an absentee ballot, I was going off to college. And you'd have to fill out an affidavit, probably have it notarized, but it was pretty serious to try to get your ballot sent to you if you're overseas serving the people of America. And today we don't do that. It's pretty much anybody can go and get an absentee ballot, and you have to make sure they're legal residents, that they are not students just voting here because they don't want to go home, and they are actually registered there and still considered citizens there. So there's things we can do to tighten that part of it up. But anyway, those are some of the issues that I've heard prior to the November 2nd election. There's other issues after November 2nd.
When, I guess, with the mood, okay, so they want some different changes, or they want some changes, or I guess some better assurances with what the election law is. Do they feel that in Idaho there has been a lot of fraud, or they want to make sure that we prevent potential fraud, or what was that mood like?
I think the mood is more we want to prevent fraud. But when you let all these smaller issues get by, they become bigger issues if you ignore them. And that's my issue, is that we shouldn't be ignoring them. Just like after November 2nd, you can clarify this with a newspaper article in the Teton County News. So they tabulated the ballots, and on November 2nd, they announced the winners down in Teton County. Well, the next day, they went into the clerk's office. Someone said, oh, we forgot to add in the absentee ballots. It flipped two of the races. Small county, small turnout, but still, that's unacceptable. That is really unacceptable. So that there needs to be some more training, a lot more intense training for not only the clerks, but also the election workers and the poll watchers. By more training, not only in what you do on election day, but also what to watch for. The kind of things I just said, drop a mask before you give them a ballot. Make sure that you are sure they're on the voter rolls and that their address and everything and their signature match what's been on file. So there are things that can be done, but a lot of things I think we've gotten lax. The other part of this is that going to an all absentee vote in that primary in 2020, we had never dealt with something like that. So if people weren't getting their absentee ballots in a timely manner, or a wife got her ballot before the husband did, and maybe the husband, in 5 days, well, I don't know how come I didn't get mine, then they'd say, oh, go ahead and reapply for it. So they could go through the Secretary of State's office or through their clerk's office, or actually a number of different sites online, file for your absentee ballot here. And I think that is why in Madison County there was one person who had received 9 absentee ballots to the same person. So there were a lot of things to learn from that debacle. Seriously, one, get away from all absentee, and that was passed by Representative Priscilla Giddings during August of last year. She slipped that bill through that we will, during any state of emergency, our polls will be open. So that's in law. So that's good. So we won't be doing this all absentee ever again, hopefully. And if we have our polls open, we just need to make sure there's uniformity across the board. And if you read the Idaho election law, that's the job of the Secretary of State as Chief Election Officer, to make sure there's uniformity in our elections. And having 5 counties where 2 of them are hand count and 3 are tabulators. My counties aren't uniform. They don't do it all the same. And remember, when those ballots or the numbers for every candidate were to be reported on June 2nd instead of May 19th during that primary, everybody was opening their envelopes at different days. Everybody was tabulating on different days or hand counting. So everything was not the same. I think if there's consistency, so let's say if you live up in Kootenai County, you come down to Boise County, and then you see things that, well, that isn't how they do it in Kootenai County. Well, it should be. We should be doing it the same way. So then you, as a voter, can report to the Secretary of State, so that isn't how they were doing it there. They weren't checking underneath of people's masks.
Okay.
That's the kind of thing we need to have. People need to be due diligent in the voting process and make sure they report anything that doesn't seem right.
Okay. What do you think is the number one issue? I mean, this year you're going to try and run a bill, I believe, regarding election integrity. Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't get passed this year, what is the number one issue? If you're like, hey, this is the biggest issue, we have to change this right now for Idaho's election laws, what would that be?
Well, I'll tell you, the one I've heard the most from constituents is all hand count. Get away from the machines. Okay. If there's doubt in those machines, serious doubt in those machines, like the Dominion machines, which I understand we didn't have any here, but then I heard there was some in one county. So that's still under investigation with me. But as far as hand count, we don't have to have results right away. And, so we're doing this for the press to hurry up and get it out. I appreciate that people want to know if they won or lost, and people want to know if who they supported won or lost. But to reduce that doubt and to hand count, to me, just seems like a good way to start anew in the state. Since we haven't had a lot of audits, except, we did have a couple of small counties audited with recounts to see if those counts were on target. But we need to do, every year, we need to do at least 5 audits randomly around this state. And so, we have issues that we need to fix, but I definitely see a path on how to do it.
Okay. So you think it would be best to get rid of automated machines?
I do. Now, I know people will say, well, Ada County's too large. I don't know. It's just, when you look at the actual turnout in different counties, it's not the full population. And so just based on even this last election, there was 25, maybe 30% of a turnout in all of these counties. They can be hand counted. Ada County, they've got a large enough area. You put precincts in different areas and have them count, and that's how they do it already in a lot of these smaller counties. But every one of the smaller counties where I have talked to some of the folks that work in the clerk's office, they say, why aren't we just doing the tried and true way? Count the vote on a paper ballot with 2 people, someone watching, you read it off, someone tabulating, and then double check it. So I don't know. That's what people would really like to see us to go back to.
Okay. What's your response to those who maybe disagree and say, all we're trying to do is make it harder for people to vote. We need to make it much easier for people to vote. Maybe we need to go to a Washington-style system of everything is mail-in. There's no in-person voting. Everybody mails in their ballots and makes it easy. More people will vote that way. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't know. I don't remember voting really being that way. I mean, as far as making it easier, I think it was more of a social event. I remember, since I guess I've lived in a lot of rural areas, people love voting day. They'd go in, you'd have the same people work, the election workers there year after year. They do a good job, they know what they're doing. And then somebody in the community buys them lunch, and everybody's finding out how everybody's doing. They get their sticker, and it's a fun day. That's what election day used to be. It shouldn't be a big chore. It should be more about socialization and unity in the American spirit running through our counties and through the state of Idaho. I don't know why anybody would want to go to all absentee. Not that we will now, because the polls have to remain open because of the bill that Representative Giddings got through. And a lot of the issues with election integrity on absentee ballots, it's in Washington. I mean, I've heard too many bad things about all absentee states.
Okay. What would you say is the biggest difference between, so you're running an open race, the current Secretary of State, Lawrence Denny, is not running.
Correct.
And there's a number of other candidates in the race. What distinguishes you as the person qualified to do this job versus the other candidates in the race?
One, I'm the only conservative running, without a doubt. I've got a proven conservative record for the past 5 years as a legislator, and it will be 6. I will continue to vote as a conservative Republican, constitutional conservative Republican. The other aspect of the job that is really exciting to me is serving on the land board. So that's where I think I trump everybody. Having served as a legislative District 8 representative, I have dealt with fuels reduction issues in our forest. I've dealt with losing grazing allotment, numbers. Folks are having encroaching pines and they're throwing trees, all over their property so they can't run their cattle. Mining. We've got mines that have been trying to get permitted for 12 years up in Lemhi. We have the only cobalt mine, resource compared to the Congo. So why are we not mining this strategic metal? It's very important. The main job on lands for a state constitutional officer, however, is the endowments. And to get the highest return on the endowments would be priority. But the other thing, too, is the Good Neighbor Authority, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard of, where the state goes in and manages the federal lands, primarily the Forest Service. So they could go in and look at a parcel, so many thousands of acres for logging. They cruise it, they inventory it, they put it up for auction, and they manage it. And then the state and the county where the timber is located, they benefit from those sales. A couple of years ago, they quit giving us the proceeds off those sales. But as Idaho Secretary of State, I would demand to go back to the table, and we're going to go back to the original agreement. If we're doing all the work, we should benefit, or the communities should benefit from those timber sales.
Okay. Before we do the last part, is there any other issues that you wanted to bring up in your run for Secretary of State or election integrity that you wanted to bring up?
Well, some people have said that, or I've heard, I guess, from one of my opponents, is that I shouldn't be running because I don't know anything about elections. I think anybody who's voted knows about elections. I think anyone who's held the state office definitely knows about elections. We've all goes through the same sunshine laws. We all have to do the same reporting. We all have to go get around to our counties and get our poll watchers if we want those people to be representing us. So I do know a lot about elections. And as an educator, I think that also is very empowering, I think, to this position, because one, election integrity issues, you have to educate the people what to look for, your poll watchers, your election workers, and your clerks. So I think being an educator just is huge. And I'm also an educator who would be interested in getting our highest economic return on the endowment lands. I want to see our schools benefit. I'd much rather see our schools being paid for by the resources we have in this state instead of by property taxes and extra levies and bonds. I think that is so important. We have 63% of our lands are federal, and we should be benefiting from it because they are within Idaho's boundaries.
Okay. So the last thing we do is we let candidates kind of talk to the camera, talk to the people, give
Okay.
their campaign pitch, and then you're welcome to plug your website and whatever else you want to plug.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for hearing me out. I am excited to be your next Secretary of State. I do think the other part of the Secretary of State is being involved with the business reporting and business. If you want to become a notary, this is where you get it, the Secretary of State's office, any filings with corporations. And I have run a business. My husband and I have a civil engineering land surveying business, which I've been president of for, ever since 1994. So I've done all this paperwork. So if you're a small business owner, I know exactly what you're going through and can help you navigate through it. I think as far as being the chief election officer, I have a definite game plan. I know what we need to work on immediately to start seeing some improvement in our tabulations of our ballots so that people have a better handle on it and we can remove some of that doubt that things are being done fairly. And lastly is serving on the land board. I think that our resources should benefit Idahoans and we need to get maximum returns. And of course, we're talking about endowments, but there's also some other ways that we can improve those returns on federal lands. So you can go to my website, dorothymoon.com, and find out a little bit more about me. Pretty much you've heard about my positions right now with Greg. And then you can also come visit or give me any phone call up here at the Capitol. And you're welcome to also go to my Facebook page, and that's Dorothy Moon for Idaho. And make comment. You can link up with me that way or private message me. I'd be more than happy to visit with you.
All right. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Yeah.